Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar this afternoon. My name is Carolyn Gramlich. I'm a family law lawyer, I've been practicing for 5 years, and I'm also a Supreme Court certified circuit civil mediator. And today we're here to talk about combining our biblical principles and legal issues. They seem to be contradictory, but you're going to find out today as we begin talking about these matters that they are not necessarily contradictory, and in fact they're complementary to those of us who are Christians especially.
And good afternoon. My name is Greg Farrar, and Carolyn and I practice here at the Farrar Law Firm Mediation Group. And I've been a practicing family lawyer for over 25 years, and for most of that time I've dealt with this only from the legal perspective and really ignored or tried to not address the issues that many of the struggling individuals, because when they come to see us, it's usually the husband or the wife coming to us with all these marital difficulties and problems and solving them on a legal basis, but never ever really talking to them about their emotional, spiritual health, because that's not usually the ground that we trod as attorneys.
And Greg, when most people come to us, aren't they in typically a very upset condition of mind, and they've had contention for sometimes months and sometimes even years, and they're sort of in a frame of mind that they just want to be done with the marriage.
And yes, it's usually after they've already attempted counseling. Usually they've done all sorts of different things if they've made efforts to try to save their marriage. And it's been my experience that oftentimes what the current situation is when they come to see us, and primarily in our role as being family lawyers, that they came at such a latter part of the process where they've already had hardened hearts and they've already done the financial damage to each other. One of them stopped paying the bills, one of them maybe stopped providing support, and they go through this process where they're arguing in front of their kids. They've gone through this history. And then they don't come to see us until they've already made the decision, and they're not really in a position to make any decision differently because they've already sorted through it to the point where they've reached the end of the rope.
And Greg, when would be the best time for them to come to us for this mediation program that we're proposing today?
And that's the key thing, I think, is when they come to see us in the context of what we're describing today. It won't be as lawyers, although they will benefit from our legal experience and our legal education and what we know about the law. But when they come to us as mediators, they can come to us with the hope of trying to resolve their differences, and we won't be giving either one of them any legal advice. And when they come to us, if they came to us earlier in the process, even at the very first juncture where one of them has made the conclusion that they're having difficulty, and I'm talking, one of them is saying, well, look, I'm thinking about a divorce. Look, I'm thinking about, moving out of the house or not paying a bill. And I know a lot of the pastors, a lot of the counselors, they hear that from the very beginning, from the first session that they have with the couple. At that point, sending them to us and allowing us to talk to them about what that legal process might entail and how they might be able to resolve their differences through this mediation process will give them and you another tool to help them try to solve their marriage and save it.
And Greg, we can discuss consequences of divorce with people without giving legal advice as mediators. We can talk them through some of the things that they're facing. A lot of times when people are looking at the difficulties in the marriage and they don't really see a way out or they don't see a way of reconciling, they're not thinking about future repercussions to themselves, to their children, to their communities, to their neighborhood, to the church. I mean, divorce has far-reaching effects.
And that's so true. And this next series of slides, what we talk about is what is the true time cost of a divorce. And oftentimes people think it might have been 6 months or it might have been a year. And we're talking about the actual time. As lawyers, the time for a contested divorce from the time we file a petition for dissolution of marriage until there's a final judgment granting that dissolution of marriage, that might take about a year. But that, in truth, that's not but a very small portion of what is truly the time cost to a couple and to a family. And what we perceive to be, and what typically is the cost time, is that the parties struggle. They find out that they have that they're having emotional issues, that they're having differences of opinion, and that takes several months, even a year or so, before either one of them even begins the process of filing or coming up with a divorce. And then they file a divorce, and then over that can take, as I said, several months or even a year or two. And then even after the divorce, there'll be a period of time when they're sorting through their differences. And if it was a bad divorce, then they have all that baggage. And they constantly, I hear when I meet with a client and when I meet with somebody at the very beginning and I talk to them about this, I say, well, look, when you think about what you're doing today, you may want to cast your thoughts forward to the next 10, 15, 20 years. You've got a child that's 5. That child, maybe at age 25, will be graduating from college, or maybe will be marrying. And just think what will happen at those future awesome events if they've had a bitter divorce, and then their child's special moments, their graduation, their marriage, may be spoiled or lessened or darkened, because then they're going to be saying, oh, mom and dad are going to be in the same room. They're going to be, this is going to be, it's going to color their whole future lives. And so the time cost of a divorce is it's not a day, a month, it's years, and it may be the rest of your life. And so as a consequence, it's certainly something that should not be minimized or taken lightly.
And we certainly are out of balance when it comes to looking at legal issues from a biblical perspective. A lot of times, as I mentioned earlier, people come to us and we discuss legal issues with them, and many of those people are Christians. And they struggle because they realize that the Bible prohibits Christians from taking each other to law, 1 Corinthians chapter 6. And so, they do have this internal struggle, but we typically don't have the opportunity to talk to them about that. But in the mediation setting, they would be free to discuss these matters in a confidential setting, in a relaxed environment, with no threat. When we're in court, we have a judge. It's a very structured environment. Everything is a lot more public, if you will. And then the divorce records become public records. In a mediation, people are free to express themselves, express their concerns in a confidential setting where it won't be shared with anyone else.
And having practiced in the secular world as a divorce attorney for so many years, I know that there's so many different cases and so many different opportunities that I've had to just kind of introduce an individual to this process. And I'll have a husband or wife come to me and they'll say, oh, Greg, gosh, my wife, she's committing adultery. She's going, and they feel like, oh, I'm going to be vindicated. This means that, clearly she's in the wrong, and clearly she is in the wrong. And they say, well, and as a consequence, our kids are going to be so disrupted, and we're going to be losing a lot of our property, and then she makes less money than I do, but I can't even pay all our bills. And then I have to tell them, I know what your biblical principles are, and and I know that adultery is wrong, and we know that intuitively, as well as the fact that it's in our Bibles that this is nothing that we should do. But we're a no-fault state, and so the legal issue when it comes to a married couple and a spouse that's committing adultery is it may not have much legal consequence at all, and that's a shock. That's one instance of a gap between our biblical principles and our legal issues. And there's so many that just come up throughout the legal process. But by the time they come to see us, and I suspect and one might not know, but if the couple came to us earlier in the process when they first discovered this, and if they both submitted to trying to help come up with a plan to save their marriage, perhaps they could combine what their values were with how we can do it legally and come up with a plan to save their marriage.
And Greg, we can draft a legal document reflecting their desire to reconcile and resolve their differences, and that could be a legally binding contract. that will be enforceable in a court of law.
Absolutely, and there's so many other opportunities, and I know that the pastors and the counselors out there are constantly dealing with all these different issues, and they're struggling with trying to keep a lid over this boiling pot of all these things going on with the husbands out doing this, the wives out doing this. They come to a counseling session and they're just glaring at each other, and they're just saying, well, look, he's done this, I can't overcome that, I can't even sort out this, and now he's not paying the bills. By the way, at that point, if they came to see us, we could come up with a temporary plan just to allow them to keep their boats afloat, where they're not continuing to harm each other financially, harm each other with their families, and putting themselves at risk, where they're actually hurting both of themselves, their families. And if they did it earlier in the process, where they could come up with a short-term plan, like, we're going to be courteous to each other. We're not going to live in the same home. We're going to live in different places, and we're going to share our children in some fashion. We're going to have a time-sharing parenting plan. You're going to pay this bill. I'm going to pay that bill, and you're going to provide this for the support. And if you come up with that and put it in writing, it's a legally binding document. And guess what? After they have this in place, then they can work on whatever the issues were that were really undermining their relationship.
And Craig, we would encourage people to stay in the same home and stay in the marital relationship. That would be the ideal. And possibly even a contract could be drafted while they're still living in the home that would give them some accountability. We as humans need covenants. We need agreements. We need something in writing to help us to be held accountable. We are very easy to break covenant, and especially the very important covenant of marriage, which God takes very seriously, and we ought to as well.
That's where this is all really about, is we're making decisions in this world that we're breaking promises, and in this, the legal consequences for breaking these promises has lessened. And so the legal consequences are, when they're not that significant, then it's very difficult for us to be encouraged to follow them. And I know we believers know that there's significant eternal consequences for this type of behavior, but we also are taught that we're saved, and that and I don't know what's happening with the world today, but it seems like the biblical principles and the promises that we're keeping are not going to be contained through the legal process. And then there's this great divide. And how do we overcome that, Carolyn?
Well, I think first of all we need to go back to our biblical principles, go back to the Bible as our foundation for truth, and also as a foundation for us to make decisions. And a lot of times we get so far off track because people are listening to opinions out there in the world. They have friends who are possibly not Christian, or maybe even are Christian, giving bad advice, and sometimes even bordering on giving them legal advice as to what their rights and responsibilities are. And so I think really, pastoral counsel is essential. Christian counseling is important. Some people really benefit from that approach. But essentially, I think most of us, as Greg mentioned earlier, or at least alluded to earlier, we know what's right, especially people who call themselves Christians. We know what the Bible says for the most part. And so just to be held accountable, I think, is probably the key.
Yeah, so often I feel like the older man that's standing at the window, I believe it's Proverbs
Chapter 7.
Yes. Yeah. And where it shows the young man walking down the street, and he comes upon what they call an adulterous woman. And the Proverbs passage is, "My son, keep my words." And isn't that awesome that God is speaking directly to us? And my son, keep my words and store up my commands written within you. Keep my commands and you will live. Guard my teachings as the apple of your eye. Bind them on your fingers. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Say to wisdom, you are my sister, and to insight, you are my relative. They will keep you from the adulterous woman, from the wayward woman with her seductive words. And the adulterous woman that's alliteration, or it's analogous for so many different opportunities that come into this world that are attacking our families.
Temptations.
And for us, I feel like I'm at the window of my house, and that's the next verse in this chapter. I looked down through the lattice. I saw among the simple. I noticed among them the young man, a youth who had no sense. He was still going down the street near her corner, walking along the direction of her house at twilight as the daylight was fading and the dark of night was set in. That's what sometimes I feel like as we sit talking to our clients, and we know that they're going down this path in this direction, and yet because they came to us as a divorce attorney, or because they came to us so late in the game, all we can do is watch them as they continue to go down this path
of destruction.
And it's a sadness, it's this brokenness which they'll have to live with for the rest of their lives, because they realize there's something that I think they realized that there was opportunities that were missed, and so what
I've heard couples say that they regret missing so much time with their children. When you're living in separate homes and there's visitation and custody issues, or we call it time sharing, children are with one parent part of the time and with the other parent the other part of the time, and parents miss so much opportunity just for sharing time with their children and for being there for important moments of the children's lives.
And there's so many other times that are lost. And I've actually had the opportunity to have be an attorney and counselor for the children of a couple, of an individual, the husband or wife that I may have represented in a divorce action 15, 20 years earlier. And they tell me what happened from their perspective and what their thoughts were. And over this time is how I came to the conclusion that we need to try something different. We need to come up with a different alternative, a different option to give people that might allow them an opportunity to take a moment to reflect and to kind of get their balance back, and to come up, see if they can save their marriage. And if nothing else, and we would so much want to work with you, the pastors, you, the counselors, to try to come up with what we call a marital salvation agreement, which would be a plan that would deal with how to address the problems that caused the marital discord in the first place, but also all these other issues regarding parenting and property and alimony and child support and everything else and anything else, so they can put all that stuff aside and focus on the true things that are truly important.
And Greg, one of the most threatening things that couples can say to each other when they're in the middle of contention is, I'm going to go and talk with a lawyer. Those are fighting words, and those are threatening words, and they create even more escalated volatility between the parties. And so, while we are family law lawyers, we're moving away from the litigation model, the contentious litigation model, and into a more peaceful and a more amicable setting of mediation. And so when people are coming to us, it's not under this contentious, in a contentious setting. It's a more relaxed, comfortable, confidential setting.
And what we believe is, if we were given this opportunity to let God give us the balance, give the couple the balance, and put God back into their relationship, because we're firmly convinced that that's what's missing, and that's what's caused the inability to overcome whatever challenges are facing a couple, is somehow or another they've taken their eyes off God. And so we can combine those legal issues and put it into the biblical principles that if that's what the couple adhere to. And there is solutions that could possibly allow them to save their marriage, and if nothing more, then they can at least come to some type of conciliation. So they're not arguing over their property, their children, over support issues, so that they can at least put those things aside, and then that would allow them to continue to go on with their lives, and with some integrity and with some ability to try to put this chapter, this season of their lives, into the entire, into their entire world, into their entire life.
And Greg, I think of two verses out of the book of Galatians. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 says, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man or woman sow, that shall he also reap." And so what we see a lot in family law is that people are making decisions, they're sowing, and then what they reap, the consequences, are devastating. And the other verse that comes to mind is also in the book of Galatians. Galatians chapter 6, verse 10 says, "As we, as Christians, have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, but especially unto those who are the household of faith." And so we have a commitment here for our mediation group to work with Christians and non-Christians, but particularly with Christians, to assist them in reconciling their marriages and reconciling their family differences.
And I know that the reservations that most counselors and most pastors have is they don't feel comfortable sending anyone to a family lawyer, to a divorce attorney, and I understand that. And so let me make it clear that if you send a couple to us as in our role as mediators and in our role as Christian mediators, then that's the only role we'll ever perform. And if we will, the only purpose that we will serve is to assist them in resolving their differences. And if they come to us with an open heart and a willingness to explore options to try to save their marriage, we will empower them, give them the tools to see what they can work through and see whether or not they can come up with their plan, giving them the feedback of whatever type of strategies we've used in the past, any other types of methods that we could observe as a neutral third party, just to suggest maybe these might be things that they might consider, such things as perhaps continuing to go through some type of marital counseling, perhaps individual counseling, perhaps coming up with other tools that that they could agree upon and put it in writing. And again, we live in a world where if it's not in writing, it's easily a broken promise. And even the most important for their relationship, their license is all they typically have, and that license just is a license to get married. It's not really it doesn't really specify what their role will be or what their obligations will be, and so they walk into this with a blindness, and then they go into, and then oftentimes married couples aren't. I guess one of the biblical terms that versus marriage traditionally was one where they made these vows and they agreed that this is going to be a lifelong commitment. But in the real world that we live in, it's caveat emptor, and it's a buyer beware. And then when they walk through the door, if they don't like what they see, and they say, well, look, one option, and I think a lot of couples do this. One option they think of is, well, look, if I don't like the guy, if he's not what I want, or if she's not what I want, after the fact, after I marry, I can always get a divorce. And that's the kind of mindset and the attitude that we're facing in this world. And so another opportunity that should be considered is some type of marriage contract. It's oftentimes uses a prenuptial agreement, and it could be a document that actually gives much more legally binding and enforceable rights that allow a couple to actually state in writing what they believe should be the principles that they want to maintain in their marriage. And if they have a legally binding document, it doesn't matter if the state of Florida says that we're a no-fault state. You can agree to make that fault will matter. And there's so many different ways to make a legally binding agreement that would allow for the biblical principles and for what the things that each of you hold dear to be legally binding.
In a contract that would conform with our biblical principles primarily, and that contract could include scripture, passages of scripture that the couple agree with, that they agree to live by and fashion their relationship by. And so we can be very creative with a marriage contract from a biblical perspective.
And and in this world, I know a lot of couples choose not to even marry at all, and they have children, and they could mediate a parenting agreement, a parenting plan, and that would allow them to know what their rights are and to avoid disputes regarding their children. We can resolve financial issues, keeping in mind what we are is the neutral ground that they can work with and on to try to come up with these solutions themselves. Again, one of the benefits of mediation over any of the other litigation, divorce processes is it's peace seeking, it's money saving, and it's time saving, and those are some of the biggest things that we have on this world, and those are the things that this would achieve that most of the other models that we as divorced family lawyers, that it costs, and the cost is incredibly high. And so the benefits of mediation versus litigation, they're significant. The differences are so significant for the cost, the emotional atmosphere.
Yes, there are so many differences between mediation and litigation, as the chart in front of you show. The one that I'd like to focus on is the benefit to the children, parents working together as opposed to being in conflict. Being an educator for 17 years before going to law school, I saw firsthand the effects of divorce on children that I dealt with every day in the classroom. And the children who got along best academically, psychologically, spiritually, were the ones whose parents got along with each other, even in the midst of divorce. And so that in and of itself shows that mediation would be the better model rather than litigation. And the time frame, as Greg mentioned earlier, a divorce can take anywhere from, best case scenario, 6 months to 2 or 3 years. And a mediation can occur, we can have 3 3-hour sessions and have a mediated agreement at the end with some directives to the couple as to how they can file for a divorce if that's the direction they want to go in. Again, we're going to encourage people to reconcile and to keep their families intact.
And so, just to wind things up, one of the things that we stress, and we can't overstress, is if you can overcome that reservation you have as to sending a couple struggling to us earlier, at the earliest possible time in the process, so be proactive. And the benefit is that they will be able to learn from an informed source what the consequences are if they were to continue down the rocky road of possibly divorcing, and perhaps recognize if they have this opportunity earliest in the process that maybe that's not the road they want to travel. And we're so convinced that is one of the methods that may really, truly give an opportunity to a couple to recognize that they don't want to do it and that they would like to try maybe coming up with a plan for salvation of their marriage at the earliest possible time. And
again, just to review, we as mediators, we cannot litigate. We cannot represent either party. And so everybody would understand up front that's one of the first things that we'll present to the couple coming to us for mediation. We can't represent you. We can't give you legal advice. And so when couples come to us, if they're referred by pastors or counselors, you can be sure that we are not going to represent them. We can't.
And we encourage your feedback. We appreciate any of you who listen to this, whether it's on this webinar or on the YouTube or any of the other media sources. We're a work in progress. We're trying to come up with ways to help you as you're going through the process of helping couples try to resolve their differences and to come up with ways to save marriages. In this world we live in, marriage is under attack. And there's so few resources, so few different opportunities to try to encourage marriage and to encourage staying married and to encourage the whole institution, which is one of our basic biblical concepts. And we, as mediator lawyers, our intent is to be part of the
solution.
Thank you.
Solution to a huge problem. And, divorce is rampant, and unfortunately the statistics are just as high, maybe even Somebody told me the other day a little higher in the Christian churches. I hope that's not true. I haven't really investigated that myself, but those numbers are very discouraging. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can turn things around by the grace of God, and this is a ministry that's been laid on our hearts by the Lord himself. And we believe that he's behind us and that he's interested in seeing, we all know as Christians, God is interested in seeing families stay together. That's his heart and that's his intent.
Yes, and so thank you again for joining us today, and please, we invite your feedback and your any questions and feel free to contact us, and we're available to go out and talk to your groups, and if you have counseling groups or if you have marital recovery or marital family groups where you feel that we could help, and we're here to do that, and we're available for that purpose, and so.
God bless you. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been our pleasure.
God bless you.